What comes to mind when you think about AI and biometrics? Or more specifically, what do you feel? These are two of the most talked about technologies within financial services, but they elicit very divisive reactions. Do you feel pessimism and fear about the technology's dangerous possibilities, biometrics' potential to track us, or artificial intelligence's potential to discriminate or even surpass human intelligence? Or do you feel optimism about the positive ways that these technologies can transform our lives and transform financial services? I was tempted to focus on just one or the other with this fireside chat, but that would be a very safe and very boring conversation. My panelist, who I will introduce in just a moment, and I are not going to do that to you. In today's talk, we're going to talk about all the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes when you mix AI and biometrics. We'll talk about the technology in the present, such as how AI and biometrics can improve our lives. And we'll also talk about the technology in the future. So if you take Elon Musk's word about the future state of AI, it might not really be that far off. He says that the pace of progress is so exponentially fast that we're about 5 to 10 years from something really dangerous happening. We have just the right expert to speak to these two important technologies. Sarah Monroe leads biometrics at Onfido. Onfido uses AI-based technology to assess whether a user's government-issued ID is fraudulent and then compares it against their facial biometrics. Sarah herself is an accomplished industry thought leader in identity, having led financial services ID solutions at major providers such as MasterCard and Barclays. So thrilled to have you, Sarah. Thank you for joining.
And thanks for having me, Dan. It's great to be here.
And I'm VP of Content, Head of FinServ Research at Insider Intelligence. We are a subscription research and insights provider covering digital transformation. 100,000 paid subscribers trust us to stay ahead of digital trends in acquiring and serving customers. On to it. The running theme of today's conversation will be that biometrics and AI as technologies aren't guarantors of progress necessarily. It's us as an industry who has to make sure that the technology moves society forwards, not sideways and not backwards. The conversation is going to hit on 7 of the most important megatrends in AI and biometrics within financial services. And time allowing, we'll hit on topics like inclusion and account opening. First, I would like to hit on 3 slides in 30 seconds apiece, so rapid fire succession to jumpstart the conversation. Here's a statement you probably didn't expect me to say to lead it off. And you can see on the slide some data. Biometrics today may be more common than ever, but arguably in some cases they are worse than ever. So why would that be? Why do you think biometrics today might be worse than ever in some cases? Put it in the chat if you think you know the answer. First, this slide features data from our partner FinTech Insights, a service offered by Scientia, which shows how biometrics are ubiquitous. So FinTech Insights, for context, tracks feature sets of nearly 100 banks and fintechs globally, assigning UX scores, collecting user journeys. You can see that upstarts and incumbents alike are adopting this technology for login and in many cases step-up authentication. With the conversation with Sarah, we'll primarily focus on account opening, but next, transitioning to the second slide and reading the chat, it doesn't look like I can see any answers have come in, so I'm gonna spoil it. It's really our masks that are causing such a challenge today. So Face ID doesn't work with a mask. If Apple reverted back to Touch ID, that would actually be a better solution for today's circumstances, which demonstrates the earlier point. Sometimes tech progress moves not forwards, but backwards or sideways. It's up to the industry to make sure it moves in the right direction. And that message is for you, Tim Apple. Heading on to slide 3, final slide, and then we're going to get to the conversation. So first, it's important to define this. What do we actually mean when we say AI? It's a buzzword. It gets thrown around, used and misused and abused. And how does that technology connect to biometrics? These are not simple questions. So AI can mean so many things, from natural language processing, robotic process automation, or in a broader sense, simulating human-like intelligence. Biometrics can mean both using physical traits to authenticate or behavioral biometrics. So like how long it takes you to type the letter M. For the purposes of this combo, and Sarah stop me if I start to speak about something incorrectly. We're really talking about machine learning that is used to compare points collected from an image, such as your face, to the real deal and approve or deny. So AI's domain narrows to machine learning and biometrics to physical. Sarah, is that about right?
That's entirely correct, Dan. Very good. So yeah, so just a couple of notes to start. So first, Onfido is, as you mentioned, an identity verification company. We do one or two things primarily. Firstly, we do document checks. So we take a driving license or a passport or another identity document, and we extract the information from that document, and we make sure it's accurate. So is there any fraud? Has the machine readable zone been compromised? Has their fonts been compromised? All those things. So we make sure, is this a genuine document? And then the second thing we do is we do that biometric check. So what we do is we extract the image from the document, which is a skill in itself. And then we take a selfie or a video and we compare the two things and say, is it the same person? And the other thing we do is to say, not only is it the same person, but also, is it a real person in front of me? So has a photo of a photo or a video been injected into the process to make sure we are certain that it is the right person applying for that bank account or whatever it might be that they've been done at that time. So that's what we do.
As somebody who has an identity or an ID that looks nothing like me, your technology must be very advanced to be able to keep up with all those changes.
Well, what we do is we train the data to look at, because there are points on your face that don't actually change. So the temples here and here and here. So there are things that do make it more difficult. If you grow a beard, if you put on or lose significant amounts of weight, those things make it more difficult. But aging per se, if the shape of your face doesn't change significantly, is something that the algorithm is able to handle.
Yeah, well, the shape of my face only changes if somebody compliments me and then it gets a little bit bigger. But that's the only risk there. So I know we have limited time and I want to get on to the 7 megatrends that I alluded to before. And we've got 23 minutes left and 7 questions to hit. So the first trend, of course, that I need to hit is digital account opening. Our insider intelligence forecasts, which are drawn on hundreds of different data sources that we tap for a consensus estimate, saw actually a dip in neobank and traditional bank account openings through digital channels overall in 2020. So greater proportion, of course, happening digitally, but overall a dip. And then we're forecasting a resurgence in 2021. The factor behind this, of course, is the pandemic. Sarah, you have a unique vantage into account opening trends at Onfido. What are you seeing with regards to digital account opening, and how is that affecting demand for biometrics?
So, I mean, what we've seen, I think, if you think about, this is not common and this is not unusual, but the COVID has required organizations to completely transform their business models. So whether it's about onboarding customers or managing call centers and their responses to customers, it really has required a transformational change. Now, if you're a fintech who only operate in the digital space, well, your model didn't change so much, but what might have changed is things like response times, because you've had a whole flux of customers who need help in a different way. So how do you help those customers? But if you're a traditional bank, and we've got a couple of big traditional banks who are customers, who lose your retail channel overnight and lose access to things like customer service centers that may have been based in India overnight. You've had to completely transform your operation literally overnight, and that has required significant step change. Now, you mentioned in your intro that I used to work for a big bank, and I did. And so, you often find for customers who bank with traditional banks, they are often very interested in, they might use the app day to day to check balances and do transactions, but when they have more complex transactions, they want to speak to someone. They want to go into a branch. So if they're applying for a mortgage. And so if they wanted to have that flow of business, they really had to transform their business and do it overnight. And for those customers, we've seen a significant uptick in volumes via digital channels.
I could imagine. Trend 2 is the pandemic. And so I got up on my soapbox about how biometrics are challenged in the pandemic environment. I'm sure Apple is quaking in their boots as news of that little criticism circulates. So Sarah, you also have a unique vantage into the challenges associated with facial authentication in this moment in time. driven by our masks. What can you say about that topic?
Well, I mean, I'm an Apple customer, and I too have been frustrated by Face ID. And if you live in the UK, it's a very, in particular, it's a market where we touch and pay for everything with our phones. And so it is frustrating. But the nature of facial biometrics is, as I alluded to earlier in the conversation, we need to see the face. And if we're only seeing half the face, if we're only seeing this, we can't measure the face. And so whilst it is a difficult process to take off the mask and it may make us less safe from a COVID perspective, it is the only way forward for facial biometrics. It might mean that we need to look at different biometrics. So how do we use voice or fingerprint or other kinds of biometrics, so the things you referred to before. But it's difficult for us to accurately match faces without seeing the entire face. And it is, as they say, the nature of the beast. It's what we need to see to make the product accurate and also fair.
Yeah. That last point, fair, I'm going to hit on in following questions. But for now, I wanted to touch on another key trend of this year, cryptocurrencies. So cryptos, of course, are very hot. I myself am a cautionary tale in that I have a lost wallet full of Dogecoin worth so much money. And so I have my own strong feelings and trauma that I'll set aside for the purposes of this conversation, because I promised myself I wouldn't cry. But Sarah, can you tell us any specifics around the level of interest that you're seeing with biometrics among crypto providers? Because I imagine that they might be great clients at this moment.
They are amazing clients, and we're very thankful for all of them. So I think crypto wallets, and we have sort of a range of crypto wallets and crypto exchanges who are customers, and it's a growing number. I think for me, I see three things that are different from a traditional fintech. Firstly, it's the breadth of the customer base. So if you think about either a fintech or a traditional bank, their customer base is generally served by their geography. So they might be in the US, or even maybe down to maybe it's California. And so that customer who's got a Californian customer base, they want us to read Californian driver's licenses really well. And they want us to make sure that we can do biometrics really well in the United States. But if you're a crypto, your customers are everywhere. So your customers have a really broad church. So they're not just in the UK and the US and Europe. They're spread across Asia and Africa and everywhere in between. And so they will need high degrees of accuracy, they need high degrees of fairness, and they need us to do this job very well. But it's something you don't see in a traditional fintech or a traditional bank. That's the first thing. The second thing is customer experience is king. So if you think about your lost Dogecoin, when that Dogecoin moment happened and Doge was running and everyone to get their handle on it, then they need to process hundreds of thousands of checks a day or a week or a month or whatever it might be. And so we need to make sure that those checks are accurate and fast. It is, and because the people want access today, because the market's in a bull run and they want access today. And so that speed in customer service is essential. And that's the third thing. And then the final thing is fraud. So, fraud is a big issue for crypto. And, given the irrevocable nature of cryptocurrency, knowing that transaction is forever and done, means that they need to make sure that when that person opens an account, it is that person. And then, so that's a really important thing. And so because of that, some of our crypto customers opt for a product that has more what we could describe as liveness. So making sure it's really the person in front of the camera. And so that means they will opt for in our solution, other people do it differently. We have a video product. And with our video product, it goes for a longer period of time. And we ask the customer to do a head turn and to read some numbers. And those numbers and that head turn process is randomly generated. So that is good. And then the other thing we've put on top of that is another thing called known faces. And what known faces does is that at the point of onboarding, we say, is this person, here's Sarah, and we see if we can see Sarah's face again in the database. And we return matches for Sarah versus whether there's Sarah with the same name. So we can find Dan and he's lost Dogecoin, or we can find Sarah, but also she's named Sam and Sharon and whatever else she might be named. And that is usually evidence of fraud rings. And so we can help uncover fraud rings for our customers. So for me, they're the big differences between, those things are really powering crypto for our cryptocurrency customers.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of fascinating things to dig into there, but the favorite string of words that I heard out of that was, "We can find Dan and his lost Dogecoin." So I'll hold you to it, and I'll be back in touch. Next trend is the rise of Gen Z. So this may be surprising to you, Sarah. It surprised me when I looked it up. But the oldest members of Gen Z are actually coming out of college, and the youngest are just going into primary school, so first grade. So with more and more of these consumers really starting to age into the financial services mainstream, where they become profitable customers, they're getting their first job. The challenge is particularly timely about, how do you authenticate all these customers in the account opening stage? Many have thin credit histories. And I know that credit histories are often mined for security questions. So did you live at this address at this date, or did you open up that card? Sarah, what are you seeing with regards to the challenge that comes with authenticating these thin file Gen Z customers?
Yeah, for me, there are kind of two questions in there. So the first question to unpack is around making sure that people can get access to documents. So in the Western world, there are still significant numbers of people, so even as they turn 18, who don't get access to a document. So if you're born in Europe, Europe has a market where they give everybody at birth an identity document, and that document follows them for life. And most European countries are now going through the process of digitizing those identity documents, and they are strong proof of identity, because they really are a strong proof of identity. But if you're from the US or Australia, where I was born, or the United Kingdom, where I currently live, there is no such thing as an identity document. You're not issued an identity document at birth, you're issued a birth certificate, and that's, that they also can be fraudulent. And so, there is a task for governments to make sure that people can get access to documents. So people that are citizens, legal citizens and legal residents get access to documents to help prove their identity. And that is because that is the single best way to prove identity. And that is an issue for governments and social bodies and things like that. And for me, that is a fundamental right that we have, and governments need to focus on that.
Yeah,
but then
well,
if you think,
I'm sorry, I didn't cut you off.
Keep going. Yes, please.
I was going to segue into the next topic because I thought you were finished, but it sounds like you have another point. So I would love to hear what you say.
Yeah, so my second point is, and sorry, maybe I'm a bit, is that the point you made around knowledge-based authentication being not, versus a document verification or biometric verification is true. I mean, I would describe it as not even a fair fight. As we described, I worked at a bank, and when that bank converted from a knowledge-based authentication process to a biometric document and biometric verification process, it was transformative. And the reason that knowledge-based verification is not good is for two reasons. One is the questions that people get asked, they don't remember. Who can remember the balance in their last credit card? So the failure rate is incredibly high. And then the thing you mentioned is that data is not very secure, that the hacks are innumerable. And so, your personal data is not very private, and it is for sale very cheaply on the dark web. And so we need better solutions. And those solutions is a document and a biometric check, in my humble opinion.
I have a funny sort of story about KBA that introduces some of the issues associated with it, which is that recently I was a victim of fraud. Well, they didn't take any money, but they gained access to mobile banking, and they changed the phone number associated with my account. So naturally, I changed all my passwords. I set up a security freeze. But as I was going through the process of setting up a security freeze on all my credit so that nobody could open up new accounts, they asked me to verify that the phone number associated with the criminal was mine in order to complete the security freeze. And I didn't select it. And I was like, I kind of remember that number. Is that the one that they used? And I got bumped out, so I couldn't do it, which just reinforces the issue. And I know also there are issues associated with divorcees too, because your credit history is associated with another person that becomes disentangled. So there's a lot to do with different segments of the population, whether it's ID fraud victims, whether it's divorcees, whether it's Gen Z, that just aren't well served by this technology at this moment.
And also older people. So when you get older, you start having less credit, right? So you're paid off your mortgage. You don't have the latest. You're not buying phones on credit. You're not buying lots. You're not having lots of loans as you move towards your retirement age, or you are in retirement. So you don't have. You also thin file. So at either end of the spectrum, you are not very well served.
Yeah. Well, underserved transitions to the next topic is about as well as anything else, which is inclusivity.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely vital topic to talk about when you think about AI in biometrics. So there's this ugly history of redlining that can't be repeated, but it risks repetition through algorithmic bias. So these systems might not work as well for somebody that looks somebody that is a person of color versus how it might work for me, for instance. And when you're talking about implementing biometrics in the context of extending financial services, that means that some people might get access to tools that others don't, which is, in a sense, new redlining. So I know that inclusion is important to you, Sarah. I've seen that you're involved in initiatives that are related to that. So how are you mitigating this big risk of unintentional bias when using AI within biometrics?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good and relevant question, Dan. And making sure that that people have access to products fairly is fundamental to who Onfido is, and it's a big area of research for us. So last year we worked with the Information Commissioner in the UK, and they regulate how data is used. Because we had the aim of ensuring that our research to reduce and mitigate bias could be done in a way that was respected the rights and freedoms of individuals and when processing their data. And that was really fundamental to us. We didn't want to create more risk by improving the system. And so as part of that work, we needed to figure out a way, as we talked about before, we label our data. We have a supervised learning model. We needed to label the data, but we didn't want to label the data in a way that identified personal information. And so we worked with the Information Commissioner to work with a system that would enable us to do this in a fair way. And we identified a method of labeling based on the passport of the individual. So, so on the training data set, so we say, right, this person's from Australia, we would assign an ethnicity based on being Australia or from Africa. Now, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So there is some, if you're from the US or the UK, where there is a broad church of people who live there, there is some noisiness in the data. But if you're from Africa, there's less noise in the data, and it enables us to label and correctly identify ethnicity quite well. So we did that. We rebuilt out our algorithms based on that methodology. And we managed to reduce what's called our false acceptance rate. And a false acceptance rate is when we accept people that we shouldn't, which usually indicates fraud. And we got that down to 0.01%. Or in other words, there's only a 1 in 10,000 chance that we would match two faces that don't belong to the same person. And whilst that delivered overall a 10% improvement, a 10 times improvement in performance overall, we actually delivered a 60 times improvement in our false acceptance rate for Africa. So we just delivered a transformative improvement for African identified individuals based on their passport. And at the same time, we didn't change what's called our false rejection rate, which is rejecting people we shouldn't. So the overall customer experience was significantly better. And so that's work we applied that model to our selfie model first. Then we applied it to our video model. So we have that lead that we've got that algorithmic performance on fairness based on video and selfie. And so that was delivered sort of end of last year, beginning of this year across those two models. And we now are working on our next generation for how we will fairly and distributely identify ethnicity and make sure that our algorithms work fairly. It's a really, really important thing for us to do.
Thank you for that very detailed response. That was fascinating to get a lens into how you're tackling this important issue. You mentioned the training sets based on several different countries. That also segues to my next question, which is just about regulatory pressures and demands that you face in different geographies. So I'm curious how you adapt your solution for the regulatory requirements that may be very different, for instance, in Africa or APAC as compared to the US?
So we don't build our product differently per se for different markets, but I would say just on regulation, we kind of are seeing two things really. We see countries that are beginning to regulate how and when biometric data should be stored, and that's sort of a trend that's growing. So in France, for example, they have a cybersecurity regulator called ANSSI, and they're introducing new regulation. And amongst that regulatory piece is around how you can store biometrics. And they have said that you cannot store biometric identifiers for longer than 96 hours. And that's quite interesting because if you have, so you talked about the beginning of the presentation around use of biometrics for login. And sometimes that requires a comparison of an image today. So here's Sarah today versus the image from before. And that product could no longer work under those conditions. So that's you know, and so we would have to effectively restrict our products in those markets, which I think is a shame. I don't think they understand the value of how biometrics work for some types of products, but that's the way they're thinking about biometrics. And then the second thing is around how our customers are regulated. And what we see is there are some markets where we describe them as more highly regulated markets. They're usually in Europe. We see it's prevalent in Eastern Europe and some Asian markets where they want to see for digital onboarding, they want to make sure that they have liveness in the solution. So that's where we see a much greater use of things like video. And they're really interested in making sure that is the real person in front of that screen? Can we prove that that real person was there? And we see that, and so they're willing to trade some friction. So a video product takes longer, it's a bit slower, versus the speed of a selfie. You know, selfie takes 5 seconds, versus a video which takes 15 to 25 seconds. So they'll trade that friction for security.
Fascinating. So we're actually doing perfectly on time. So we are about to hit the 7th megatrend, and then I wanted to ask you a rapid fire question.
Sure.
So the next megatrend is deepfakes. Of course, they're all over the news, and in this era of social network misinformation, fake news, easy access to tools to make people appear to say something they didn't is really terrifying, especially when you consider how little trust exists with politicians today. But narrowing the lens to financial services, are you seeing any emerging trends with deepfakes or cutting edge fraud methods like printing out silicone masks, for instance, or is that itself, and I hate the term, fake news?
Well, it's definitely not fake news. So I think we've all probably seen those. There was a video of Barack Obama. There was a deepfake video of Barack Obama a little while ago, and then actually recently in China, deepfakes were used to defraud the Chinese tax system. So they suggested at the time that it was there was lapses in the security system of the tax system in China, but that was quite interesting. So we know it's a trend, and we know it will happen at scale at some point, but it's not common because it's quite expensive to do. And so what you generally see is more common types of fraud. And so we see things like we talked about before. So is a photo of a photo. So we require a selfie or a video. So is it a photo of a photo? Is it a photo of a screen? Is it a video of a video? Is it a photo of a document? So all those kind of things are more common types of fraud. And actually our solution works very well for that. We do see some 2D masks and 3D masks. And our solution does work well for those. And we've got some new changes to our algorithms so they work better. But as I said, most people have more opportunistic fraud. What can I use today rather than that mass fraud? As I said, we have our known faces product, which is where we see people who are, what we see is some people who are really good at producing fake documents, right? So as good as we are at trying to identify the template for a document and where the machine readable zone should look, they're really good at producing them. Right? It's big business. Really big business. They make a lot of money. They make a lot of money, right? And so it's a cat and mouse. And then that's why something like known faces, where we say we've seen this face before with a different name, really helps our customers out.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left, I believe. So thank you so much, Sarah. This was a really fascinating discussion. I learned a lot personally. I hope everybody in the audience did as well. Thank you for your time and attention. I want to leave everybody with one final quote. Since we touched on the positive side of the technology and the negatives, which is this, and it's attributed, I believe, to Churchill. A pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So in other words, as we consider new technologies like biometrics and artificial intelligence, we'll need optimists to invent cars and pessimists to invent seatbelts. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.